Hello, I'm David Green, and welcome to a conversation with Dr. Joy Jordan Lake, the author of the novel Blue Hole Back Home, selected this year as the Common Reader at Amarillo College. We're in the studio of Panhandle PBS, joined by a group of students who've spent time this semester studying the novel. It explores the tensions and violence that erupt when a family from Sri Lanka moves into a small, all-white Appalachian town. Please join us for the next few minutes as we talk with Dr. Joy Jordan Lake about her life and her work. Joy Jordan Lake, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
You have had quite a diverse career and life. You're a professor at Belmont University in Nashville, taught writing and literature at Tufts University and Baylor University. You've served as a chaplain at Harvard University. You started a food pantry and served on the staff of a multi-ethnic church. Now, I believe all good stories have a common theme, and I'm interested in this. With all that you've done, what consistent theme would you say runs through your life?
Oh, tough question. I sound so ADD when you read it out, and it sounds better on paper too, right, than the reality. Consistent theme: stories, love stories. You know, growing up in the South, I guess that's you know, those sort of trying the stories to make people laugh, to make people cry, to try to explain things. And even doing my doctoral work, that kept me going on those, you know, late nights of trying to crank out a dissertation. The stories behind what I was researching kept me going. And
19th century literature has been one of your loves, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, especially the feminine authors. You've written 3 nonfiction books,
right.
And one of the questions I have for you is what concepts from your nonfiction work has gone into Blue Hole Back Home?
Well, I guess things like trying to look at the sort of forgotten stories, or the stories that really haven't been told. Maybe that's a common theme there, now that you ask. My work and my dissertation was on the novels responding to Uncle Tom's Cabin, which I didn't even know existed until I stumbled across them, and looking at a lot of slave narratives. And so I guess I've always been fascinated in sort of historical events that nobody talks about, that have kind of gotten swept under the rug, or authors that have been forgotten about, or stories that are captivating, that need to be retold.
And you focus on that in your teaching?
I do. I'm just part-time with Belmont, which is perfect because it allows time for writing. But I do. I get to, right now I'm teaching a Southern literature class, which I love. Very smart students. It's an honors class, and they just, you know, I learn so much from them, and reading these great works, and just to talk about stories and how they change us and challenge us, and maybe that's where it ties into to my work running a closed closet food pantry. I always felt privileged to get to hear people's stories of, you know, when they came in, why they were there. And
with your diverse experiences, and I heard you say this last night at a talk you gave here, you mentioned the phrase listening to life, and I thought that was really significant, and I'm interested to know what that means. How can you tell us how that impacts your writing?
Well, it's you know, so many of us, we can just plow, and I'm the worst at this, just careen through a day and just have your to-do list and drive people places they need to be. But like when I was running the closed closet food pantry along with a team of wonderful people, everybody's story is different for why they would need to slip into a church for help, and just these beautiful and tragic and complicated stories of, you know, moving from Haiti, and I've got 6 kids, and not a single one of them has a pair of mittens, and it's January in Boston. Wow. And, you know, just these beautiful stories. And I guess that's changed me a lot, to make me listen better to the people around me, not make assumptions, because the assumptions are almost never right, about who someone else is, and just listen to my own life better, about who I am, and maybe ways that how I'm living isn't matching with how I want to live, and those sort of challenges. But I just think that's important to pay attention to listen to our lives and the lives around us.
In one sense, I want to talk about Blue Hole Back Home. You know, it could be described, and I've heard it described as a coming-of-age story.
Mm-hmm.
But in the midst of that, the different characters in many ways seem to be asking the question of themselves, am I doing the right thing? And so I'm wondering, in your mind, is it more of a coming-of-age story? Is it more of a story about morality, or the two? How are the two linked together, coming of age and developing a sense of moral alertness and moral courage? What would you say about that?
That's a great question, and I think it's fair to call it a coming of age story, and that these people are young adults, teenagers. But I think, you know, the sense of coming of age in a moral sense is an ongoing process for all of us, and it had better keep going through our whole lives. And so I was writing it when I was in my, I guess it started with a short story that was published in book form in a collection, and was later made into a novel. So I guess I was 20s and 30s maybe when I was, and so, you know, again, sort of the process of looking back at my own life and the little town that I had come from, and again, just seeing more there in my 20s than I had in my teens, and more in my 30s than I had in my 20s. And so hopefully for all of us, we're always on a journey of becoming more aware.
Right. Another specific question about the book, there's a phrase that really caught my eye in the book, the end of the rainbow. Real briefly, what does that mean? What does that say to us in the book?
Well, that particular scene is probably, more than any other, the reason I wrote the book. Wrote the short story originally, and then later turned it into a novel, thanks to a wonderful book reviewer in Chattanooga. But that comes from an actual experience where I stood with a young woman from Sri Lanka who had become my friend, and we were both about 16, and she had just had a cross burned in her yard in our sweet little town, and we were both crying, and she asked me, she was of Moorish descent and Muslim, and so her family had been discriminated against in Sri Lanka because they were Moorish and Muslim. They were the minority, and so her father had promised them, and she said to me, you know, he told me if we came to America, this was the land of opportunity. There will be no barriers here. We'll be allowed to be everything we want to be, everything we've been gifted to be. This is the end of the rainbow, her father had told the family when they were moving. And so she looked me in the eye and she said, with tears streaming down her face, she said, what happened? Tell me, explain this to me.
Death of a dream, yeah.
Yes, and I think the reason I wrote the book was I don't remember what I said, and I've always been haunted by that. And I know I babbled something, you know. I know I must have said something back to her, but whatever it was must have been terribly inadequate, because I remember seeing on her face that whatever I said did not make everything okay. And I knew that in my heart, whatever I had said was just pathetically inadequate. And I've always just been haunted by what did go wrong, what did happen. This was a warm town of wonderful people.
Sure.
What happened? And what was there under the surface that I hadn't known existed? And how had I ignored that, or how had I been sheltered from that? And it so rocked me, along with some other experiences, that I guess writing the book was sort of my way of trying to answer that question too.
Sure, kind of a catharsis.
Exactly.
Well, we have a group of students with us today who have read Blue Hole Back Home and that are very eager to visit with you. And so I think we're going to spend some time listening to their questions, if you don't mind.
Fantastic.
So let's start with this side over here, this gentleman in the jacket.
Hi. 9/11 and the years following 9/11 issued in a greater amount of both xenophobia and Islamophobia within America. And I'm curious, based on both the themes of your novel and experiences in your own life, what your impression was when all of that was transpiring.
You know, it's been interesting. That's a great question. And it's when I wrote the short story, it was just called Blue Hole, I think, or maybe Blue Hole and the Burning Cross. And it was published in a book called Grit and Grace, my first book. And I just based the character Farsana on the actual young woman who was my friend. Her name was Shyama. And she was Muslim, sort of non-practicing Muslim when they moved to the States, but that was her background. And so in my case, it wasn't a decision, except that I was really trying to honor that friendship that I had lost, and again, a sense of catharsis. So that was in 1997. And then when I turned it into a novel, it was post 9/11. It was in like 2006, 2007 when I was writing it. And it is interesting now when people read it, very often they'll assume that I made her Muslim on purpose so that we could have these conversations about Islamophobia. But I love that was who she was. It wasn't a marketing ploy on my part, or a way to kind of get across a certain agenda. But I think it is interesting that while very often when I'll speak to groups your age, the beautiful thing is a lot of times people will say, well, the good thing is our generation is post-racial. We're beyond a lot of the stuff that your generation dealt with. And the beautiful thing is great progress has been made. But it is interesting that in terms of some of the other issues of people making assumptions or stereotypes or fears, that in some ways we've regressed in terms of making false assumptions that we know who someone is just by how they look, or we know one fact and we supposedly know everything about them is so wrong. But great question. It's been interesting to see that something that was just a non-decision for me has engendered great discussions. And I love the fact that even in groups where they'll say, I kind of feel like the racial piece we've done well in this particular community, but now this other piece we've not done well. There's still an us-them going on in this area. So that's been neat to see people open up about what their community still struggles with.
What are your thoughts on the comparison of Blue Hole Back Home and To Kill a Mockingbird?
Christian, I'm always honored when people make that comparison because I love that book. The funny thing is that I hadn't read it for many years, maybe a couple of decades, before writing this book, and I'm glad that I hadn't, because I think it would have been too tempting to have really subconsciously pulled in even more of that book. I'm sure I must have read it probably in middle school, or because everyone did. It was always required reading, but I had no conscious decision of, I think I'll update, To Kill a Mockingbird, and I think I'll create a female character that's just like Scout. And it was very much the white female protagonist, Shelby, nicknamed Turtle, was kind of loosely based on just my own very awkward adolescence. Always being, the kid who didn't fit in well with kind of girls her own age, and my brother let me kind of hang out with his friends for a couple of years in there. So, I went, after the book came out and some reviewers began to make that comparison, I went back and read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I was startled how many parallels there are. So I'm sure in that way that stories kind of become a part of our lives and a part of the way we see the world. I'm sure there was some of that back in there that I wasn't even conscious of. But anyway, thank you for asking that.
When you're actually in the writing process, how do you keep yourself direct on your topic and keep from veering off into another topic or a direction you don't want to go in?
Ooh, that's a great question. It's hard, and I have all sorts of ways of tricking myself from, this is deeply odd, so I don't recommend this to anyone else unless you're as odd as I am, but I'll sometimes start early in the morning. If I've dropped a kid off at school, I'll go straight to some public place like a Panera or a Chick-fil-A or any place. If there's some sort of back corner, I can kind of ensconce myself. Something about that public setting, oddly enough, makes me focus more. I don't know why that is, but maybe because there's so much else to shut out, but it's nothing that I'm personally responsible for. There are no permission slips that I'm supposed to have signed, or bills I should have paid, or dirty dishes in the sink. And so I'm able to focus because I'm shutting out all these kind of conversations around me. And then once I'm kind of in the zone, then it's safer for me if I want to go home to my home office, or if I need to go in to teach a class or something. I've kind of been more in the zone, but I have to play all sorts of tricks on myself, because I will, unless I have a deadline from an editor and I know the hatchet is right here, it's so easy to get distracted. And it's hard with any piece of fiction because anything can happen. So it's nice in this case, because a number of the incidents in the novel were from actual incidents. They didn't all happen in summer of 1979. A lot of them are heavily fictionalized, but I did at least have a skeleton of actual events that I wanted to include, and that helped a lot to sort of stay a little more focused, because that is the danger of fiction. You can, and now maybe a bomb should go off. Anything can happen. So that's a great question.
When Farsana's dog was killed by the townspeople, was there any real brutality like that you experienced in your life and the events that you had?
It was when I was thinking about the actual things that happened. One of the actual events, the downtown shooting that's described in the novel, is from actual events in the spring of 1980 in Chattanooga. And it's described somewhat similarly, 5 African-American women who were just randomly shot by 3 guys who were drunk, who were driving through the middle of Chattanooga down what used to be 9th Street. And no one ever, the guy who was holding the gun and shooting and critically injured these 3 women, he went to jail for, I believe it was between 3 and 6 months. Never, no fines, nothing. Then was let out. The other 2 guys who were in the car with him, never, not a day in jail. No fines, nothing. And so there are a number of events like that. The Klan roadblock is from my own childhood, and a number of events like that. And the cross burning and the threats to the family were actual events. The hanging of the dog, I will tell you, I just mentioned this with a group where one of my best friends who lives in North Carolina called me from an airplane right before it took off, ranting at me, and she just gotten to the part where the dog is killed, and she's a big animal lover, and she was just, I'm so mad at you. Just kind of, I am crying in public, and I'm so angry at you for killing the dog. And then when she got to Jimbo's death, I don't know that fazed her, but anyway, the dog made her so mad. But there was no dog involved in the actual event, but that there was a rock thrown through the family's window with threats made to the family. So scary, scary stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone from, right here in the front.
Going back to the writing process, how hard was it to transition from writing news to writing nonfiction and then writing fiction?
That's a great question, because a lot of writers, Hemingway and lots of others, have been newspaper reporters, and it is a hard transition. And of course, academic writing, all of you are students. Academic writing is a very different thing, and so that's where having other people read your things or having a great editor is so helpful, because I have a tendency, if I've been reading the 19th century novels that I love or doing academic writing about those, you can get away with a lot longer paragraphs and, clog it up with all kinds of great clauses and stuff. And then your fiction editor will come along and go, what is this? This sentence goes on for a page and a half. What are you doing? And, you need, at least I do, I need those good editors in my life. And I need to it helps me if I'm trying to read something more along the lines of what I'm trying to do. So I make myself shift over, if I'm trying to write a contemporary novel, to shift over to reading some of the novels that I've heard people talk about and say they loved and their book club just read it, and try to go and read those where it's faster paced and it's, each chapter keeps it. And that's very helpful to me, to be reminded of, okay, wait, here's what I'm supposed to be doing, not this kind of writing over here, because it is a big shift.
When I was reading the book, the characters, at least to me, were very, very distinct. And I was wondering, while you're writing it, how do you keep your characters, their personalities, their characters organized to where they would do what they would do in the situations you present?
That's a great question, and it's a great thing if you've ever taken a creative writing class to do exercises on, or just on your own. At least for me, it's all about the beginning. That once you have I think Flaubert used to have cards he made on each one with little biographies about each character, and he would do an entire biography about a character before he ever began to write his novels. Different people do it different ways. For me, at least, it was once you sort of have a few facts about who this person is, somebody like an LJ who's supposed to be an intellectual and a little dorky and a little stiff, and he's sort of based loosely on several people plus imagination thrown in, but once you have sort of a general idea, then that person can kind of usually begin to take on some flesh themselves, and once you have your characters established, it becomes pretty clear. They would say something like this, with this kind of syntax or this kind of, and you can even hear it in your head. It helps to even, I think, read a character out loud and see, does that sound like how that person would speak? I know at one point, a friend of mine who's been a friend since childhood, Susan Lancaster, had some critique on Farsana, trying to hit that sort of, part of her critique was that if she's been living there the whole summer, she doesn't sound, in the early drafts, she didn't sound any more relaxed in her English by the end of the summer than she had at the beginning of the summer. So we sort of threw in some more contractions, by the end to try to make it sound like her English was coming a little more fluidly and that sort of thing. But once you get those characters where they really sort of have feet and have breath themselves, they start to kind of take on their own ability to, they would say something like this, they wouldn't say that, and that starts to take care of itself. But it's a lot in getting that beginning right.
Emerson sounds like someone you know really well.
He's part imagination, part several people, and partly based on my brother. My brother assumes that I think Emerson is himself and is, of course, the hero of the novel.
Right.
And my brother and I were, and still are, very close, and he really was, especially now that I look back, he was extraordinarily gracious as a teenage guy to let his nerdy little sister hang out with his friends. But so the brother-sister relationship there is kind of loosely based on ours. They kind of hate each other one day, but
Sure.
they've got
Sure.
each other's backs.
Sure.
What made you want to become an author? Was there like a specific event that happened that made you want to start writing, or is it something you've always loved, or what happened?
I've always loved to read, and I was sick a lot as a kid, so I did a lot of authors. You'll read that Robert Louis Stevenson was sick a ton as a little kid, read all the time, and I read a lot, would sit in my bed home from school and read. And I remember in fourth grade, I don't remember making the decision, here's what I want to be, but I remember in fourth grade, we were supposed to write a poem about something, and I had written this poem about a deer, a stag standing in the snow, and the teacher put it up on the bulletin board and read it out loud to the entire class. And I thought, whoa, this is the coolest thing ever, because I was this very painfully shy kid, and to me that was kind of my voice, because I had trouble having a voice in real life, and that was wonderful. And then in fifth grade, and elementary school teachers are just my heroes. In fifth grade, I'd never told anybody the secret of mine that I had decided I wanted to be a writer, and I was reading all those, kind of Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters and all quietly. And my fifth grade teacher came by my desk one day and put an article on it and said, "This is for you for someday when you grow up and become a writer." And I have no idea how she knew. She was just one of those extraordinary elementary school teachers who has a way of nurturing every single child with 30 kids in her classroom, and she that was like, I don't know, being knighted or something, being affirmed, being kind of ordained or something sent out. I mean, that was just so pivotal for me. And I was able, before she died, at least my first book had come out, and I was able to include her in the acknowledgments about how much that had meant to me.
Well, thank you, audience. I think we have time for one more brief question, and it's something that when I first picked up the book, it was just a constant theme in it. What do you think the book ultimately says about the nature of redemption, reconciliation, and courage? That may be a big question to ask, but if it could be summed up, if someone, in other words, turns to the last page of the book, what do you want them to come away with, and how it might affect their outlook on life and the way they act?
Yeah, and I do believe stories can change us or influence how we act. And I guess I'm startled if I ever hear anyone refer to it as a sad story, because I guess I know I want to be the kind of person who's a Jimbo who always assumes that every single person, there's still room for redemption. There's still room for transformation. You never give up on anybody or anything. You never give up on a town. You never give up. And we can all change, and we all should be changing. And so I guess for me, it's a hopeful story because it's about the nature of hope. You don't give up on people. And even this little town that again was such a nurturing place to grow up for me, but then these tragic events, but that town has continued to change and become a welcoming place for a lot more different kinds of people than it used to be. And I just think that I guess, as you rightly said, redemption and forgiveness and hope, you don't ever give up. You don't ever count anybody out.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to our audience. If you'd like to know more about this show, AC's Common Reader program, or the work of Dr. Joy Jordan Lake, please visit panhandlepbs.org. See you next time.